We are officially at the 1-year anniversary of the Nintendo Switch 2, and man, what a year it's been. You had entitled fanboys who pined for the next direct or big game. You had grifters who took legitimate criticisms towards Nintendo and blew it way out of proportion, making it their entire personality once the views started rolling in. But most important of all, you had a year that, if you touched grass to avoid annoying people on the internet and were willing to expand your horizons, was really fun. I feel like I've already gotten my money's worth with my Switch 2, and I'm very excited for the future of this console. It's pretty much everything I wanted it to be. A more powerful Switch that carries over its momentum. Honestly, the biggest gripe I have with it is that it was such a seamless transition from the original Switch that it didn't feel quite as punchy as the Switch did coming from the Wii U. Not that it lacked any bite, as even a year later, improved performance being the main gimmick of a Nintendo console still feels unreal. I've been playing through Final Fantasy VII Remake for the first time on this thing, and it's been a fantastic experience on the go. I can't believe this game looks and runs this well on a tablet. Obviously, I'd get a higher frame rate and resolution on my PC, but gaming at my desk isn't as comfortable. I can't exactly recline after a hard day's work, where I was already spending the entire day at the computer. This increase in power has made me more excited for what games Nintendo could put out in the future than I have been in a long time. Don't get me wrong, the Switch has a great library, but the weaker hardware held back a lot of what could be accomplished by more ambitious teams. Not just in terms of visual fidelity either, but in terms of what gameplay concepts they could use that wasn't possible on prior hardware. Tears of the Kingdom was already black magic on the last system. What could they possibly do to push it further with the next game? This isn't just speculation on my end either. The Mario Kart and Bananza teams both directly said as much, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was the narrative for a lot of the games we'll be seeing in the first few years of the Switch 2. But what about those big first-party Nintendo games? Honestly, I think that while the lineup wasn't as impactful as the Switch's first year, it really didn't need to be. The Switch was Nintendo coming back swinging after the failure of the Wii U, so that lineup needed to be solid. The Switch 2 only needed to continue the momentum of the first Switch, and it did that just fine.
The Switch 2,
while more niche, had way more games that personally appealed to me. You've got the cool, exciting new Mario Kart and a sweet new 3D Donkey Kong game within the first 2 months of the system's launch. Factor in a cool Zelda spin-off, a new Kirby directed by Sakurai, and a Pokémon spin-off so cool that even I, someone indifferent to the series, actually picked it up. And a neat spin on a new Yoshi game unlike any of the prior entries, and you've got yourself a varied and overall solid first year. It was so solid in fact that the only non-eShop title I didn't pick up was Mario Tennis Fever. Even then, if I can find it for a cheaper price, then I definitely will because it looks like the best Mario sports game we've had in a while. This goes in the smiley face tier, which is the games I'm interested in trying tier. Oh yeah, we're doing a tier list by the way. I'd say the biggest hit or miss offerings from Nintendo have been the Switch 2 editions. Pokémon Legends ZA and Metroid Prime 4 are effectively the de facto way to play the game from what I've seen. I didn't see much of any discussion around those games regarding the original Switch versions, other than they look and run worse. They're also interesting as the only games to launch alongside the Switch 1 release, probably because they were the last heavy hitter Switch 1 games, and they also wanted to strengthen the Switch 2's launch year. I don't really care for Pokemon that much, so I was fine missing out on Legends ZA, and my brother has been taking his sweet time with Metroid, so I haven't gotten to see if I think it's as disappointing as everyone says yet. In terms of being better looking and playing versions of the games though, from just looking at game footage online, I think they do their job well enough. The rest though are a fairly mixed bag. The only ones I ended up picking up were the ones for Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Technically also Metroid Prime 4, but that was as a present for my brother. On the this doesn't really appeal to me tier, represented by the frowny face, we start with Jamboree TV. I really don't like how a big chunk of the minigames seem to be tied to the camera accessory, and it's bizarre that a lot of the graphical enhancements are exclusive to the new content. Kinda disappointing considering that I think Jamboree is the best installment in the series since 8. Animal Crossing I'm on the fence on because it is only $5, but at the same time, it feels like the mouse mode is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for making it an upgrade pack instead of just a free update. Xenoblade Chronicles X is a shockingly terrible update with this weird upscaler that they used instead of DLSS like virtually every other game on the system. I'm not much of a graphics snob. I am a Nintendo fan after all, but I think if you're gonna be charging extra money for something like this, you should use something acceptable. Look at Super Mario Odyssey. That resolution boost is great, and it doesn't have a weird smear effect on the terrain, and it's free. Things are a little different for the 4 I actually got. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have been playable in 60 FPS before, but that required modding and overclocking the original Switch, which risked potentially damaging the hardware, or emulation, which obviously Nintendo isn't exactly okay with. So seeing these games run at a flawless 60 FPS on official hardware, while also receiving a noticeable resolution bump, it really made me fall in love with them all over again, and it did a great job on selling me on the Switch 2 as an upgrade over the original Switch. Picking up a wagon and seeing the frame rate stay steady healed something deep inside of me that I didn't even know was broken. But that's not all, and not even what they're charging you the $10 for. That would be access to the Zelda Notes app. Now I don't know about y'all, but it's like they made a dumb little phone app just for me, and it was well worth the upgrade in addition to the performance updates. I loved the voice memories. Not only were they cool little bits of lore and character development, but they also just added a fun new thing to do when running around the world. I know that you can just listen to them all on YouTube or whatever, but I really do think that you miss out on a good chunk of the fun exploring the world and finding them yourself. The navigation system is handy, even though the voice part of it is a little silly and I never personally use it. It's clear that Nintendo saw all those websites that had the markers and stuff, and having one of those integrated for my actual personal save file that automatically updates was really nice. I also like the achievement system and all the little things that it encourages you to do. A nice organic way to squeeze even more playtime out of them. I've always loved these games, and having an app on my phone that encourages me to play them even more is pretty cool. I really hope that Zelda Notes is carried over to the next Zelda game on Switch 2. I do have a conspiracy theory regarding that, as it does kind of feel like a feature they wanted for the next game, but then decided to add to these two games as a sort of testing ground to see how the masses would respond. If this is the case, perhaps they'll go even further with what they do. It's not for everyone, but as someone who constantly looks for excuses to go back to these games, the Zelda Notes app was right up my alley. Both are going in A tier. Yes, I forgot to record this beforehand. I am very good at making videos. The Switch 2 edition of Kirby and the Forgotten Land is much the same in terms of the performance. Though it took me until the release of the Switch 2 edition for me to play the game, so I'm not sure I fully appreciate how it plays now, in comparison to the original like I do with the Zeldas. But even just looking at the footage of the original game, while certainly playable, it does make me glad that I decided to procrastinate on this one. The game is pretty much everything everyone said it would be, definitely one of my favorite 3D platformers, yada yada. Don't really have much to say that hasn't already been said. In terms of the actual Switch 2 content, Starcrossed World features hands down my favorite levels in the game. They go far beyond being mere remixes and are effectively entirely new levels that are contextualized as taking place on a different part of the map than the main level they're based on. Stuff like exploring an entirely different section of the mall or going on top of roller coaster tracks in the theme park. It was all a wonderful treat that really capped off the adventure well. I will say that while you can do the new content alongside the main campaign, in terms of the story and the general level design, I think it works better as post-game DLC rather than something you do alongside the actual main story. And I'm glad that I played it like that, because I don't think it gels that well with the rest of the levels. The new story stuff was interesting and fun, not quite as intriguing as the main story, and there isn't anything close to when you enter the science facility and meet the ultimate life form for the first time, but I did enjoy what little it did add. Overall, if you haven't played the game yet, I'd say pick it up. A tier. Mario Wonder's Switch 2 edition is far and away the best. The flower power-up is really cool and versatile, allowing you to create a vertical projectile along with giving you a little mid-air hop and float when you press and hold the jump button long enough. Easily my new favorite power-up, and I'm a little sad that you can only consistently get it in the DLC levels or if you have the special badge for it. The Koopaling bosses are far and away the best and most engaging bosses that 2D Mario has ever had. Roy's a little lame since it's just using this lamp to shoot energy balls at him, but the other 6 are really engaging. Iggy is definitely my favorite. There's just something really satisfying about this fight in particular, with the ground being entirely the piranha plants that you have to bounce off of in order to damage him. I think that the new content works a lot better during a regular playthrough of the game rather than when treating it as post-game content, sort of the inverse of Kirby really. It makes the new shorter boss courses a lot easier to swallow, and it peppers the more varied and interesting bosses throughout the adventure. I really enjoyed the Toad Brigade challenges. There's a nice variety of them, and outside of the defeat all enemies, which was always thoroughly miserable, I felt that it was just a solid little collection of fun challenges. I especially liked how difficult a lot of them were, though the way you ride through the magma tube with the spring feet has a timer that's a little too tight, and I spent a good hour just trying to figure out how the heck to squeeze a couple more seconds out of a run that was otherwise perfect. Regardless, the challenges were good and a nice reminder of how much I love this game. Then there's the real meat and potatoes, the multiplayer attractions. I didn't expect to be saying this, but it might actually be the best bit of the new content. Granted, I do think your mileage with it will vary depending on who exactly it is you're playing with. I got the impression from a lot of these games that it's specifically made for those who enjoy getting into shenanigans when playing 2D Mario with their friends. So for me and my brothers, it's a match made in heaven. While there are more standard minigames like collecting the most coins to win, there are also quite a few more creative ones, like this one where you have to throw electric poles, but you can't spam them because inevitably you'll get hit by your own. The competitive ones are fun, but I actually found myself having more fun with the co-op attractions. There's something fun about having to awkwardly coordinate with your friends through these. I don't know my brother's feeling on this, but the jumping one where you have to count how many times everyone jumps was really fun, and I'm surprised that I actually managed to get it right. We only lost because I didn't take grabbing onto the flagpole into account. The blockmaker one, that's sort of reminiscent of the gamepad player from New Super Mario Bros. U, was also fun, and it feels a lot more thoughtful here. Though that's only from the perspective of the platform person and not the one who's placing the blocks. While initially I was disappointed that this is the bulk of the new, fully original content, I'm not at all upset that they decided to focus more on this stuff. I can definitely see this being a fun thing to toss into the game night rotation every now and then. And the single player content being as fun as it is with the fantastic boss fights and all the ending challenges, I think this deserves its spot as the only Switch 2 edition in the S tier. Now we can finally get onto the big boys. With the console anniversary being right in the middle of the year as opposed to towards the beginning, it can definitely be a bit tricky to compare to prior generations. But I think that in terms of variety, this was hands down my favorite first year for a Nintendo console. It didn't have as many heavy hitters, but it did have more games that appealed to me personally. But before we get to any of them, I guess I probably should talk about the eShop games first, and why they're going in the didn't care for them tier. Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour hurts my feelings. I've always been fascinated by technology and how it works, and this is a game dedicated to showing off the intricacies of how they engineered and designed the system. It's so cool. But that pesky price tag just really ruins the ride. I personally think that 1-2 Switch was more egregious than this game at $50 with far less bang for your buck, and I knew that it was going to be paid before they even confirmed it in the Direct. But it still kinda sucks. I just don't really think that any of the mini-games on offer would be worth much more than a basic novelty that quickly wears off, and watching a playthrough online teaches me all of the information on the console's design that I'd want to know. It's just not really a game that feels worth getting. Drag X Drive is interesting, and I bet it's the most forgotten game in the system's library already, which is a bit unfortunate because it's a super interesting concept for controlling a game. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world, the Joy-Cons aren't exactly ergonomic when held on their side, and you need a lot of space. That said, I think that moving the wheels in this way is a fairly interesting concept that absolutely does carry the game, at least from what I played. Once you get the hang of it, it's surprisingly intuitive, and I feel like if I did play actual matches, I probably would have a good time. I think what drags the game down though is that playing for longer sessions is uncomfortable. It really wears out the arms, and my hands kind of cramp up a bit. I'm still surprised there's no dedicated mouse grip to make games like this more feasible to play, as that would alleviate a lot of the comfort issues. Not to mention the art style is bland and lacks the character of a lot of Nintendo's other games. And honestly, it just doesn't have legs. Wait, that's not, I meant it's not really an evergreen title. Anyway, I think it would be cool if they made other games like it that used the mouse in interesting ways and didn't leave it here, because I think that having a mouse on both controllers could allow for more experiences than just as a supplementary cursor in things like Metroid or Pokopia. I had a decent time with it, but I got my fill from the demo. C tier. Most of my biggest issues with Mario Kart World from launch are still quite prevalent. Battle mode is still an afterthought, the added Bob-omb mode doesn't even feel like a band-aid over that problem. Knockout Tour is really the only mode that fully takes advantage of the open world in a race setting. Free roam is still a little too skewed towards intrinsically motivated players like me, and the routes take up so much of the race time that the actual tracks themselves fail to be all that memorable. Rainbow Road is still my personal favorite track in the game because of how distinct it is. Despite that, after further reflection, it's also the easiest Rainbow Road in the series, and I don't think that it takes advantage of the new trick system as well as it could have. It feels like they might have skewed it a little too much towards being a grand spectacle, which is fine as a finale to the game, but it would be nice if it was a little more challenging and lived up to that part of the track's legacy. That said, I'd say the game is in a much better place compared to launch, and the things that I liked then have only continued to grow on me. Things are actually tracked in free roam now, so I feel more incentive to actually engage with that content and see which areas of the map I've been neglecting. While the character unlock system still sucks, being able to set custom items means that it's less inconvenient trying to unlock certain characters. Routes are more interesting, apparently. I enjoyed them to begin with, and I didn't notice much of a difference, but people online say they're a little bendier. More importantly, the community largely stopped calling them intermissions, which is good because I hated calling them that, and routes is a far more accurate way to describe what they actually are. I still haven't done all the P-switch challenges or collected all of the medallions. I only recently unlocked mirror mode about a month ago. As I stated back in that initial video, this is a game that I want to savor. I'm still basking in the glory of a new Mario Kart after over a decade of 8. Whenever I boot the game up, I kinda just meander through the different modes. I want 100% the game one day, but I'm not really in a rush to do so. And it's definitely become something of a comfort game by having played it this way for a year. The trick system has more and more become the standout part of the game, and finding creative ways to use it in a race to gain speed and not lose your lead is so engaging that I feel you're missing out on a huge part of the game by not actively trying to use the mechanic to the fullest. Randomly performing tricks won't really get you anywhere, you have to be smart with how you use it. And I've had a really fun time trying to master the game, even though I've got a long way to go. Knockout Tour is still some of the most fun I've had with any racing game, not much else to say there. And of course, the soundtrack is still one of the most impressive in Nintendo's catalog, and every day that passes without it being added to Nintendo Music is another day where I declare that Nintendo is committing a war crime against me. When Mario Kart World hits its stride, it's still one of the system's best games. If we were basing it solely on the highs, it would be an S. Unfortunately, the lows are still prevalent enough to bring it down to an A tier. I'd say that Donkey Kong Bananza still feels like the biggest game to have released on the system. Now, I'm currently working on a dedicated video on the game, so for now I'll just give the Cliff Notes version. This is the first game in a long time that truly felt next gen. Just playing this game and seeing it remain at a very consistent 60 FPS outside of the final boss fights and during intense destruction sequences, you can tell just how compromised the game would have been if they did release it on the original Switch. While Mario Kart World had a similar development situation, I think that the roadblocks of the weaker hardware are far more apparent during the moment-to-moment gameplay here. I love that the game is a spiritual sequel to Odyssey and how it expands on certain concepts from that game, like the purple coins being fossils, and how the outfits you buy with them are more than just cosmetics, even though I do miss the ability to choose how you want to look based on how it looked, rather than how it functioned, because DK doesn't always look how I want him to now. The end game is the best ending sequence to any platformer I've ever played, and it's right up there with Tears of the Kingdom in terms of spectacle and raw aura. I love how music is used. Pauline is a wonderful companion who never gets on my nerves despite how chatty she is. Void Kong is one of my new favorite DK characters, and I really hope he comes back in the future. The story is actually kinda cool, which is not something I was expecting. Overall, it's a fantastic game that I wish I liked more. Yeah, after the honeymoon phase was over, there were a few rough edges that I noticed that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. The pacing of the game is noticeably worse than Odyssey. Some of these levels are a bit too big. I think the more you play the game in big sessions rather than smaller chunks, the worse it gets. It's not like I wanted to quit playing or anything, but there was a sizable chunk of the game where I was just hoping it would hurry up because it was getting a tad repetitive. I do like how some levels have you using the terrain in different ways, like using it to protect you from lava dripping from the ceiling, or tossing a chunk to create a platform you can cross. Unfortunately, it's not really as extensive as I'd like for levels that are this consistently large. I think the main reason this is such a sore spot for me is that Odyssey is the single most perfectly paced game I have ever played. No one level lasts longer than it needs to, and the amount of time you spend in any level is how much you want to spend. I never really appreciated how perfectly crafted the pacing of the adventure was until I played Bananza and tried to pinpoint exactly why the game didn't click with me as well as Odyssey. I don't really like the Bananza transformations. They are my least favorite part of the game. I feel like they're a little too cumbersome to use when experimenting through the level, and they often trivialize any challenge not specifically designed around them. The skill tree is a really cool addition that almost solves the moon problem from Odyssey. However, because I don't really care for the Bananza transformations, that means I don't really engage with almost half of the skill tree. And because the bananas only go towards the skill tree and are otherwise optional, in the latter half of the game, I found myself exploring less and less because why would I go after a banana to upgrade something when I've already upgraded everything that I want to? Compared to Odyssey, where you need 500 moons in order to access the final challenge, and you only need 120 or so to beat the game, that's a pretty good push to be looking for moons no matter what point in the adventure I'm in. If Bananza had it so that you need to collect a certain number of bananas to beat the level, then I think I wouldn't have a single problem with the Banandium gems. In the long run, saying that I don't like this game as much as my actual favorite game of all time isn't really that condemning a statement. A lot of my issues are really only super massive problems when compared to a game that I have a very strong bias towards. When not comparing it to Odyssey, they're just a couple of rough edges that aren't even universal issues that everyone will agree with. Not to mention that the lows of the game are massively overshadowed by the incredibly strong highs. S tier, not even close. The more time that passes, the more my view on Age of Imprisonment sours. Nothing has really changed since my original video. The premise is wasted by focusing on some of the most boring characters in the Wild era, with not enough focus on the new original elements of the story. It answers the one question I never wanted answered because the mystery was more compelling than any answer ever could be. We never got to explore anything other than empty fields, which doesn't really give us a look into what life was actually like in ancient Hyrule. Link's lack of presence means Zelda's entire journey feels hollow, and it ultimately fails to justify its existence. But I also really like the moment-to-moment gameplay. It is incredibly fun and satisfying to use the Zonai devices and special attacks in combination with each other to take down large swaths of enemies or to take advantage of boss weak points. The game justifies playing as multiple characters far better than its predecessors with the side quests, and I think that it lays out a good blueprint for the next Hyrule Warriors game with how involved the story was here. Honestly, I think the main feeling I got after beating Age of Imprisonment was a desire for a Hyrule Warriors game exactly like it, but with a story entirely unconnected to the rest of the series. Because when you don't have the guts to do something weird with it like Age of Calamity, you get something really bland. I don't really have much to say here that I didn't already say in my video on it, so if you want more detailed thoughts, go watch that. B tier. I never really got into the original Kirby Air Ride, yet I was very interested in Kirby Air Riders. One of my most wanted games was a new Sakurai game that had nothing to do with Smash, because the only thing he'd been working on after the release of Kid Icarus Uprising was Smash, and it would really suck if such a talented and iconic developer was locked to a single series. Finding out that it wasn't even Sakurai who pitched it to Nintendo, but Nintendo who pitched it to him made me even more intrigued. And I gotta say, it's very difficult for me to decide whether this or Donkey Kong was my favorite Switch 2 game of the first year. The game is absolutely gorgeous, and despite the high speed of the races, it's never too fast to appreciate the scenery. The music is fantastic, from the euphoria of Floria Fields, to the grand melancholy of Airtopia Ruins, to the perilous journey of Galactic Nova. Every track is distinct and has a vibrant melody and distinct sound. It's a very fun soundtrack to listen to, both in-game and outside of it. The racetracks aren't the longest thing in the world, but the game makes up for this by making them endlessly replayable, and having a deceptively simple control scheme that is very satisfying to consistently improve at. There are a variety of missions to complete, and the checklist is a fun element to try and work through every time you boot up the game. The missions have nice variety, and it encourages engaging with as many mechanics and characters as you can. I haven't engaged too much with City Trial, mainly because I don't think it works as well in single player as it does multiplayer, and the fact is that Mario Kart is a much more casual friendly racing game, so that generally wins out. I'm also not super big on online multiplayer stuff. I vastly prefer having couch co-op. That said, the little I did play I thought was pretty fun. I like the frantic energy of it as you explore Skya to collect enough patches to get an edge during the competition minigame. Definitely seems really enjoyable with friends. Not the biggest fan of Top Ride, it's kinda just a less interesting version of the main Air Ride mode with controls that just never really clicked with me. Easily ignorable though. Road Trip is the best part of the game. and I really need to get back to it because I've only played like 2 stages. Dude, shut up. Not only do you have a neat little story, but you also have a good collection of the rest of the game's content all blended together as you tackle a series of challenges to beat the current road you're on. Whether it's winning a lap of a race on a track from Air Ride, beating all of your opponents, smashing blocks, it's a great showcase for the game as a whole. I originally wanted to make a dedicated video, but I don't have much else to say beyond that. It's just a really good game. S tier, not even a question. Pokemon likes to copyright claim me almost every time I show something of theirs, so if my section on Pokopia is missing from the video, that's why. I originally didn't have much interest in Pokemon Pokopia. It looked kinda neat, something right up my alley even. But I guess I had an anti-Pokemon bias because I didn't really look into the game that much after its announcement. Then it launched, and its staggering success shocked me. It's a Pokemon spin-off, of course it was going to be successful. There's no way it wouldn't be. But I don't really think anyone thought it was going to be an honest-to-goodness system seller. So I decided to look into it more, see what was appealing to the masses. And the more I looked, the more I found out that literally everything about the game appealed to me aside from being associated with Pokemon. So I gave in and bought my first ever Pokemon game. As someone who isn't a Pokemon fan, I gotta say that I was not expecting this game to charm me as much as it does. The story is surprisingly compelling as you try to figure out a way to get the humans to come back and restore the island to its former glory by reducing the pollution. I like taking care of the different Pokemon and their needs, gathering materials to restore the Pokemon centers, and building habitats for the Pokemon to live in. There's a nice balance of managing the different towns and exploring the land to find specific materials necessary to advance the plot. I will say that I didn't personally find it a black hole that sucks in time like a lot of other people. Some days it really gets its hooks in me, and other days I bounced off pretty quick. The act of terraforming is a little cumbersome, so I never really felt like taking on any bigger projects and tended to stick to the main story. I just don't really think it's as well suited to longer play sessions compared to something like Minecraft, for example. Not really a criticism of the game, and the general consensus definitely indicates that I'm in the minority here. I'm not suddenly a Pokemon fan, and I'm not really sure that I'll be that into Winds and Waves, but separated from the series context, I think it's a nice little cozy game to go back to every now and then. B tier. Yoshi and the Mysterious Book closed out the year, and if anyone says, "Who asked for this?" then direct them to this segment right here because I did. I asked for a new Yoshi game. He's my favorite Mario character, and his games are really charming and cozy. Mysterious Book kinda feels like a spiritual successor to Yoshi's story, also known as the most slandered game on the N64. It's not a traditional platformer where you try and beat a stage, but rather a game about exploring space and interacting with the environment. After Goodfeel put out 2 games that tried to harken back to Yoshi's Island, looking to story for inspiration was a good call because I think it leans a lot more heavily into their strengths as developers. The art style is fantastic. It's this hybrid of a storybook with the rough Sobel outline sketch thing that they use for a lot of the environment, and the gentle hatching elsewhere, as well as a sort of clay sort of look for the foreground elements. It blends these 2 styles together to craft a much more interesting looking game. After Crafted World was kind of just a lesser Woolly World with a less visually interesting hook, I'm glad they went in this direction. While it would have been cool if they leaned into the clay style more, at the same time I dig the more subtle blending of these 2 ideas. Another step up from Crafted World is the music. It's not the most amazing thing in the world, but a lot of the tracks are quite pleasant, and unlike the prior game, I would actually want to listen to a lot of these tracks outside of the game. The level design is where this game shines the most though. The game is all about these whimsical creatures and how they interact with Yoshi and the environment. There may not be any death or damage, but that would just disincentivize experimentation. I actually wanted to explore the levels and see what all I could interact with and how the creatures would change how I did so. And even though the game isn't a traditional platformer, it doesn't skimp out on the actual platforming. It just uses it in a different way than the standard platformer. You get a lot of really fun levels that have more creative creatures like this spider with a ball you can throw around to swing through the level. Or the one where you're being hunted by this leafy guy, or the Shy Guy trafficking level. If anyone claims this is a baby game, show them this level and then they'll start asking why it's not rated M. Atrocious jokes aside, I think this game is just a generally cozy time. With so many other games with great platforming that focus on clearing obstacles and pits and stuff, this game was a nice refresher and I hope to see more like it in the future. I do have more to say, but I don't want to pad out the runtime because it would require a long dissertation of my opinions on the Yoshi games as a whole, so I think I'll save that for the inevitable dedicated Yoshi video. Needless to say, the game is pretty solid. A tier. Thus, we reach the end of the video. What did we learn? Well, not much besides the fact that my opinions are whack. I don't really have any specific conclusions to draw. I just like this console, and I think it's nice that Nintendo's developers have something that doesn't hamper their vision. Sure, games like Age of Imprisonment and Yoshi probably could have run on the Switch 1, but even disregarding resolution and frame rate, you'd have to think of just how compromised these games would have to be in terms of level design, special effects, and even just certain gameplay mechanics. How stripped down and compromised would it have to be to release it on that hardware? It's just nice to have a Nintendo console where I can go into a new release without wondering what the bottlenecks are, and without seeing the visible compromises that the developers had to make. And third parties are actually playable on the thing. So overall, while it may take a while to get the biggest heavy hitters for the thing, I'm good with them releasing whatever. It's also cool that it's backwards compatible with the Switch 1 so that I didn't have to miss out on Tamagotchi Life Living the Dream, which is my current game of the year, and it will take a generational masterpiece to dethrone it. That is not me speaking in jest. Thanks to the channel members on screen now. While other YouTubers use memberships for money, I use them so my videos can have credits. And also for money. So if you want to support the channel and get exclusive commentaries on my videos, plus whatever other random stuff I come up with, consider clicking that join button. Thanks for tolerating this end of video ad.